If you have ever read a book where the story wanders from thought to thought, memory to memory, no real plot, no major culminating point, and yet you can't stop turning the pages because the voice is that mesmerizing. And if you like books that read like jazz with raw, meandering, unpredictable, and yet very deeply human emotions, if so, then today's book just might be for you. Today I'm reviewing The Unicorn Woman by Gayl Jones. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and I've been making my way through the Pulitzer Prize finalists and winners in the book categories. That means, of course, fiction, history, biography, general nonfiction, memoir, and even poetry. You can check out my full Pulitzer Prize reading journey on my channel playlist, which is linked below, and of course, a link up here, over there, wherever. And today we're taking a look at one of the novels in the Pulitzer Prize finalists. That would be The Unicorn Woman. It is a novel that defies many conventions, but it is written by the legendary and enigmatic Gayl Jones, and it is a deeply reflective and thoughtful effort to make sense of a post-World War II Jim Crow America. However, let's start with a quick description of the author because Gayl Jones' life reads like a novel in and of itself. Gayl Jones was born in 1949 in Lexington, Kentucky. She was raised in a storytelling household where her mother wrote stories and her grandmother wrote plays for the church. She began writing at age 7, inspired by the women around her. Despite growing up in poverty, attending segregated schools, and living in a house without an indoor toilet, Jones excelled academically and eventually earned degrees from Connecticut College and Brown University. Her debut novel, Corregidora, I have to admit, I have not read it, so I actually may not be saying that correctly. I should probably look that up. But it was edited by none other than Toni Morrison, and it was a landmark of Black feminist literature. It was fierce and raw and unforgettable, so I read in the reviews. Again, I didn't actually read it yet. But I do know that the praise poured in from major literary figures like James Baldwin and John Updike. And then her follow-up novel, Eva's Man, it pushed the boundaries even further. Critics called it a dangerous book for its brutal look at sexual violence and madness. And Jones wasn't just writing about trauma, she was revolutionizing how it could be written. Then her life took a dramatic and a tragic turn. After marrying a volatile man named Robert Higgins, the couple fled the US in the 1980s following his arrest at a gay rights rally where he claimed to be God and made some inflammatory public statements as well as brandished a firearm. So Jones resigned from her university post with a letter addressed to Ronald Reagan saying, "God is with Bob and I'm with him." We're actually not entirely sure if that is an authentic note, but it has been frequently cited in reference to her and her character and her fascinating story. And so then the pair lived underground in Europe for years, eventually returning quietly to the US. In the late 1990s, Jones's mother became gravely ill, and so after a tense and public confrontation with the hospital, Jones and Higgins accused the medical center of misconduct and even sent a memo to President Bill Clinton. This is a recurring theme if it was the case. In 1998, amid the release of Jones's novel The Healing, a bomb threat letter, an intense police scrutiny, and years of paranoia culminated in tragedy. Her husband Higgins died by suicide after a standoff with police. Of course, this devastated Jones. She herself was placed on suicide watch after that. And then she disappeared from public life. And so for 2 decades, she wasn't writing, at least wasn't publishing. There was not much known about her. And then she ended that silence. And she published a book in 2021, Palmares, which ended that 20-year drought. And it in and of itself was a critically acclaimed book. It was a sweeping historical novel that became a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. I can only imagine taking 20 years off because so much tragedy has happened in your life, and your very first book back is already a Pulitzer Prize finalist. And since then, she has released several other books, and of course, this one has gotten more attention as it is another Pulitzer Prize finalist. Just a side note, I know I pointed this out on my other video that talked about the 2025 finalists and winners, is that this category, well, most of the categories usually have 2 finalists and 1 winner. Sometimes things are a little different. Sometimes I'll have 2 winners and 1 additional finalist. And this one actually had 1 winner in the book James, which was a incredibly popular book from last year. It received all rave reviews, And then there were actually 3 additional finalists, and I don't know if that was maybe because James got just so many votes. I don't know. I know nothing about the voting process, but this was one of the 3 finalists that, of course, did not quite win to James, but I still think that it was an absolutely fascinating read, which, of course, we will get into. So let's talk about this book, Unicorn Woman by Gayl Jones. It is set in the early 1950s. It follows a Buddy Ray Guy. He is a self-educated Black Army veteran who is navigating post-war America. He is actually known to his other soldier friends as Budweiser. It's common to have a nickname, and it was part joke and also part tribute to his wisecracking nature. These are the things you find out in the myriad flashbacks and just stories that he tells. Buddy was a cook in the Army, and he is actually a tractor repairman by training. And beneath his laid-back and very affable surface lies a very thoughtful man who is searching for meaning in a world that often renders Black men invisible. And I think that will become more evident as you consider what exactly the Unicorn Woman stands for. That is, of course, the namesake of this book. Buddy is immediately a very charming and clearly intelligent and also a perplexing individual. You find out almost immediately that he's full of contradictions. He has his ability to move fluidly between Kentucky and Tennessee. That's where the bulk of the book takes place, although he also talks about a few other places. Like I mentioned, his time that he served in the Army during World War II in Europe. That's one place that gets mentioned. And he also talks about Miami and well, Memphis is in Tennessee, but he's referencing a lot of different places. And the book contains a lot of interactions, and at the heart of it, you also get the sense that he is always feeling like a bit of an exile within his own country. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a reason why that I think it's an interesting approach. And just like anybody that fought in World War II, you can see that part of the effects, the lingering effects, is of course the conflict and the fighting that happened, although he himself, like I said, was a cook, so he did not see significant fighting, but just there's still a lot that can shape you as an individual simply by being in a war zone. And of course, like many Black veterans, Buddy has returned not to the same honor as everybody else, but instead to a Jim Crow America. And so a lot of what is going on is this search for dignity and some understanding in the world that he lives in, and there's definitely questions of emotional and spiritual as well as intellectual development that is a big part of what he is trying to accomplish through the various vignettes and stories that he tells. And so as he wanders through cities and towns, you see him reflect on stuff like his military service. That's a big part of it, but as well as this post-war disillusionment, some of his romantic encounters in post-war France, as well as in the States. That's a recurring element, is his discussion of women that he dates or has some kind of relationship. And then also a big question is just the strange and the surreal people he meets along the way. Again, the titular mermaid woman, but also just the barkers and the landladies and the aspiring feminists and some myth makers, all sorts of interesting people that he's going to engage with and discuss. And you see him being both a participant in, as well as a keen observer of, a changing and at times a hostile world. The novel is framed around Buddy's encounter with, as well as his obsession with, the Unicorn Woman, who is just a sideshow attraction that he first sees at a traveling carnival. It's how the book opens up. As a matter of fact, he talks about how he did not know how a woman could have a horn and could be a unicorn, and then on top of that, he is surprised when she is Black, and that sets much of the tone of the book, this surrealism, this ambiguity, these all sorts of questions of authenticity, and that is one of the opening elements of this book. And so when he sees that she is a Black woman with a single white horn protruding from her forehead, as well as silent and enigmatic, sitting on a stool in a rotating display, he decides that he really wants to know more. And despite the horn's possibly artificial origin, she represents something very real to Buddy. She becomes an ideal or a mythic muse, a woman both captivating and knowable. She becomes a symbol of uniqueness and mystery, like a unicorn itself, but also a metaphor for Black womanhood, as Black women are frequently exoticized yet misunderstood. There's actually fascinating literature out there where you can see the depiction of Black women changes over time depending on the situation, whether it is during slavery time. This is, of course, going to put an emphasis on the vixen and the overly sexualized black woman. And then after, you also have the mammy look. This is going to be the popularity of Aunt Jemima, or in Gone with the Wind, like I said, Mammy. So you can see where you have these changing presentations of black women. For a variety of reasons, the culture would do that, and admittedly, rarely are they going to be for good reasons. And again, you can see how the unicorn woman would be a representation of that. And on top of all that, Buddy is not shy. This is clearly also a projection of his desires and his hopes. And as he cannot figure out the reality of it, it is clearly also a representation of his frustrations about everything. And so he's going to search her out, not in a particularly aggressive way, but he certainly goes to all the carnivals, hoping that he'll see her again. And she does reappear at several carnivals, and he even eventually gets her name, which is Ziga Dalen, which is a big part of what he's trying to do. But she remains at a distance from him, and so Buddy's longing for her is really less romantic, and by the end it's more spiritual and even metaphysical, because she is the embodiment of the transcendent that he is seeking. And so all through that, you're gonna get a lot of different through lines and a lot of different themes and structures about this book as you're telling the various stories, which maybe I should take a second to say just what some of these stories are, because they bounce all around. Like I said, he talks about his time in Europe. He does spend a fair amount of time, and quite a few of the interactions that he details is him visiting people, which would include family members. He has an aunt that he visits, his own parents that he visits, and then going to various professionals or people that might be able to confirm whether this horn is real or not. And so there is certainly an element of trying to determine whether the horn is real. And again, you can see how that's playing into his expectations and his desires, and again, his frustration. But also, in the end, there is this element of, does it matter? I mean, all the other situational elements that he can't necessarily realize the things that he wants, you know, that can become a very powerful stand-in. So some of the themes that you're going to see on account of that are going to be, you know, a young man's fancy. His first encounter with the unicorn woman, and really his post-war reflections are going to be embodied by this obsession with the unicorn woman. Also, again, asking, what is the horn? I mean, it is this exoticizing element, so it gives him this place to muse on mythology and identity, and of course desire. Why would that be something that would appeal to him? It's such an aberration. And then all of this is part of a larger question and conversation around being carnivalized, or in other words, a meta-commentary on the spectacle and black identity and literary myth-making. I would say that the novel really resists any conventional plotting. I've told you some of the stories that you're going to encounter, but really just understanding the broader context of a guy that's obsessed with finding out more about this unicorn woman in the 1950s, and as he goes around exploring it, and you do certainly in and of itself have that element of magical surrealism with the unicorn woman, but there are also times where his reflections tend to take you a little beyond just your traditional conversations. And so it is a oral style narration that is rich in digressions, as well as repetition, and certainly a lot of wordplay. I have to say, Buddy's voice is very compelling. It's sometimes comic, sometimes it's tragic, although he tends to hide the tragic. It's always layered. And I haven't read Jones's earlier works, but I certainly get the sense that this is similar to a lot of her other works in terms of echoes of black vernacular traditions, the jazz improvisation, and of course that folk storytelling that I think is at the heart of all of it. One of the themes that I wanted to touch upon that is clearly there, but it is a peculiar approach, and that is the theme of race in post-war America. The novel is clearly an examination of how black soldiers were treated after World War II, how they were celebrated abroad. He uses stuff like his relationship with women in Europe as an example of that, but also this relationship between the other men in the military. He starts out with the commanding officer thinking that he's joking around with him when he calls him Buddy, and he confirms that Buddy is actually his name. And that's just one of the many stories that he tells. But you can also see with time that even the racial tensions there become mitigated through the fact that they're working together. And then, of course, once the war is over and black veterans come back to the United States, they are not treated the same way. way. And this is going to be certainly one of the things that is defining this book. And another major theme, again, this goes back to the whole element of whether the horn is real or not, and that is myth versus reality. I mean, is the unicorn woman just a person? Is she, in the end, a legend in Buddy's mind, a space where desire and identity and imagination can all blur together? Is the horn real or not? Or is that just part of the persona? All of this is questioning what is real and what isn't. And there's a lot of questions about masculinity and memory. You know, all of Buddy's retellings of past lovers and war stories and community experiences, they reveal the vulnerabilities of his Black masculinity in particular. I'd say this leads to a powerful spiritual searching. He finds himself discussing philosophy with professors or consulting root doctors. These are some of the stories that he tells. Buddy is on a spiritual quest that is deeply tied to Black folk traditions and existential longing. And that is all part of this question of performance and spectacle. Again, from the carnivals that he's obsessed with to the military pageantry that he was part of, Buddy lives in a world obsessed with display and voyeurism, but who gets to be the viewer and who becomes the exhibit as he himself becomes obsessed with the unicorn woman is a very powerful theme of this book. I would say that Jones's tone is intentionally disorienting, or at the very least, it's not linear, but at times more circular. Again, going back to that questions of memory or myth. And so we also see that Buddy himself is being both sincere, but also there's times where he's a bit unreliable. He's fully aware of how he mythologizes women as well as war and himself. And so the result in this novel is this interrogation of the act of storytelling as much as the stories themselves. Because of the voice that she uses, because of Buddy's ability to be intriguing. It is funny. He has a special way of turning a phrase. I think that the voice that she uses for him is incredible. It is something that kept me going, even if I didn't feel like the story was going anywhere. As I saw the ending even coming, I was like, I don't think we're going to have any sudden dramatic turn in this book. And we didn't. And that's fine, because you were so engaged with the way that he was talking. And I think that's, well encapsulated in the stories that he tells. And it just gives us, this really philosophical, but also this bluesy soliloquy, as well as just sharp social criticism, and frequently all in the same paragraph. And that is because the humor is rich and biting, but also shadowed by history and loss. I should say, I keep saying that this deals with race and post-World War II. A key part, and you should be prepared for this, is that Buddy himself does comment on it. And Buddy himself does have a clear proclivity to reflecting on his experience and what he's seen. But at no point is he particularly aggressive in his tone. At no point is any of the disparities that he sees or any of the various manifestations of segregation, at no point does that become the central focus of it deliberately. It may be a part of one vignette or another. At no point does he turn the whole book's focus on singular events or this idea of equality or any of that. So I don't want to give the false impression. I don't want people coming in thinking that this is a book that's going to make them angry about segregation. On the contrary, I think this is a book that is going to make you more reflective, not on all inequalities or injustices in the world, but really give you a chance to simply reflect on the status quo and what kind of impact that can have on a person. And I think that's what you're seeing in Buddy throughout this. And I'd say specifically the status quo coupled with someone who had an experience that changed the way they saw the world. And in this case, that would have, of course, been his fighting in World War II. But then it is coupled with this unicorn woman that he is obsessed with. So, I think it engages deeply with meditations on race and masculinity and art and myth in 20th century America. And I'd say that there is a lot here to appreciate in regards to the prose, the way it is written, the way that it draws people in, the way Buddy himself is a very compelling individual. So who is this book for? Well, if you value that voice and that character over plot, Buddy Ray Guy isn't taking you on a journey with a map. He is going to be riffing and reflecting and wondering. And I think that that is the joy of it. And if you appreciate literary experimentation and are comfortable with narrative ambiguity, which is certainly part of this, then I think you could enjoy this book. If you're interested in post-war Black life, or masculinity, or alienation, or the psychological aftershocks of war and racism, I think you can appreciate this, but again, be prepared for it to be one of the many layers in this storytelling. If you love fiction that reads like oral storytelling, where every page feels like you're sitting on a porch and listening to some highly talented raconteur, I certainly think you could enjoy this book. Or if you're exploring the Pulitzer Prize finalist and want to understand why this book stood out to the committee, it's not especially flashy, but it is undeniably a rich piece of literature. And if you want a text that I certainly think is worth rereading, because I think there's a lot here with all these different layers and the references again to mythology and just the literary history and the questions of music and politics and folklore, I think all of those are things that you certainly can find in this novel. Who is this book not for? Well, if you need a clear plot with rising action, some kind of climax, and then some kind of resolution, this may be very frustrating to you. The book resists a lot of traditional structure. Or if you prefer books that tie up loose ends or offer a satisfying conclusion, you're likely going to feel pretty adrift by the end of this. If you're annoyed by stream of consciousness or this oral style narration, then this book is not going to be for you. Admittedly, some people are probably going to struggle with Buddy's views on women, which can be complex, contradictory, and I think it's sometimes uncomfortable. Again, the whole focus of the book is an obsession with a woman that he has not met, but he has only observed. And I think that can be reflected in a lot of things that he says. And the text certainly does not offer any kind of easy moral clarity. It just offers his voice. But I think that that is actually one of the things that makes this quite special. For me, The Unicorn Woman is a novel of deep rewards. I think it is certainly strange, and it does wander, and it refuses to deliver a traditional payoff. But none of that matters when you find the voice as compelling as Buddy's, and you are ready for that. I do think that if you're not prepared for that, I could see someone getting frustrated. But I should also say that if you don't know this by now, if you're looking at books that are finalists or winners for the Pulitzer Prizes, frequently they're not going to follow a traditional novel style. That's just something that I've noticed over the years, and that's something that you have to be ready to accept if you want to read more books that win the Pulitzer Prizes, especially for the fiction. A lot of this book is just following Buddy around, both in his thought processes, his concerns, his interests in the Unicorn Woman, and just all sorts of things that is leading you to follow him around. And I would say that that's probably kind of the point of the book, is to just be willing to follow someone along with their journey, even if it is this meandering, philosophical, thought-provoking, and complex journey. I would love to hear what you guys thought about this book in particular, or the other books that are on the Pulitzer Prize finalists and winners for the year 2025, or just any thoughts that you have on good literature. Please let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this video or any of my other material, please feel free to share it. That's how we get the word out. And of course, like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.